So this is the February 24th meeting of the Fiber Broadband Completion Task Force. My name is Mark Howell and I'm the chair. And I'll do a quick roll call of task force members. Gordon Brockway.
Present.
Scott Hopkinson. Scott, I'm not sure I heard you.
Yeah, present. Just gonna put my boom mic down. Yeah, I usually use this headset just for listening. So
sound check, right? Okay, and David Hessel, as I mentioned, is not present, and Gail Heyer.
Present.
Okay, myself, Mark Howell. Great. Well, thank you for being here. Happy Thursday, everyone. And I will just move on to, we have been doing a rotating clerk assignment. I know Gordon was clerk on the 10th and Gail on the 17th. Do I have a volunteer clerk for tonight?
I can do it if you'd like.
Thank you, Scott. So that'll be.
Since I already started it, in
I
case I had to
appreciate it.
keep doing it.
And I haven't seen any minutes distributed from either of those two meetings. So
Sorry, I still owe you one.
No worries.
I do.
Yep. So that's fine. We'll have minute ceremonies in another meeting, and that'll give us a chance to kind of dig in today. So I think we do have plenty to do, and sometimes those are time consuming. So in terms of future meetings, I'll just note that we'll meet on Thursdays in February. I'm sorry, Thursdays in March. February is almost over. This is our last meeting for February. On the 3rd, the 10th, we'll skip the 17th because of the enterprise hearing, and the 24th and also the 31st is also a Thursday. So we've got maximum.
By the way, I'm pretty sure I cannot attend the 10th. I believe that will be the. I'll be gone that week.
Okay. Great. And just for awareness, I'm traveling, hopefully getting out of here on Saturday.
Good luck.
And we'll be back till Tuesday. So I'm hoping to actually post an agenda for next week's meeting as early as tomorrow, or send it in for posting, just so that I'm sure that we're posted for next week. So it may look like a fairly generic meeting agenda. Obviously, if anyone has anything that they want to add in after that, we could do an amended agenda as late as Wednesday, but I want to make sure that we're well ahead of the 48 hours so that we don't miss that. Any other, and I think that's what I had from the chair's report perspective today. Not too much. So moving ahead, I do not have any new updates on coordination for the fiber with the roads program. I know it's appearing increasingly that I'm going to have to follow up with town staff to get some updates on that. And
Mark, could I just ask you to pause for a second? I see FinCom Enterprise hearing. Did you just want to note that is happening? Is there anything that, like, do you think we should attend or anything we should?
Yes, I think it's a good idea to plan to go. It's our opportunity to see the presentations for the enterprise budgets, which include the broadband budget, as well as ask any questions that we might have. And we could take some time at some point to determine whether there are any questions that we would like addressed. As a courtesy, I think if we know what they are and discuss them in a meeting, we might want to, inform the presenters, which is usually it's the light plant director and the broadband director, telecom director, which as Jason Bulger is here at tonight's meeting and is also acting telecom director. So let's see, who, Scott, you were missing last week, right?
I was.
Yeah, so we did talk about the fact that Greg Marcinek has left the town, and Jason Bulger, the CIO, has taken on responsibilities as the acting manager for broadband and telecom periodically, and he joined our meeting last week, and I see he's here again, and that's very much appreciated.
Okay,
So,
thanks
so,
for that.
you know, I personally think that, and it might be worth it, and I don't mind doing this as an agenda item next week for us to, we could relook at the forecast of the, you know, as published for the enterprise budget, and see if there's any questions that we might want to raise. We also have the opportunity to, you know, potentially make some kind of comment if we think there's something we might want to talk about. But yes, I do think it's not a night off, but an evening too. It does tend to be a little bit of a long evening. So because, you know, you'll see water, sewer, BD Center. By the time there's a remarkably large, the solid waste disposal program, there's a lot of enterprise going on in the town. But it does happen to coincide directly with our meeting.
Well, allow me just to put one note in. This is the enterprise budget meeting that will be on the 17th.
Yeah, 17th at 7 p.m.
Okay, thank you. I just want to put that in there.
Yeah, it's called the enterprise budget hearings, and you know, it's posted on the town calendar, and it was hopefully everybody got their town warrant.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's number 3 on that, or 4 on that list. There are also hearings on other on other warrant articles scheduled, the first of which is this coming Monday night. So we're in the march up to town meeting for sure. And but I think that from our perspective, it's, you know, sort of most interesting to think about it in terms of what, if any, input or, you know, items do we think are important to sort of cover. One could imagine that recommendations that we end up making in our report would influence the content and the reporting that is done at the enterprise budget hearing. I guess I'll make this other comment, is that because the enterprise budgets are typically revolving funds and they are not actually discussed in any detail at all at town meeting. In fact, often the articles that actually approve the ongoing operations of the enterprises end up as consent calendar items. So the enterprise budget hearing really turns out to be the one and only place where, you know, any sort of public input and feedback is solicited, you know, across the board for things that we, you know, frankly, mostly great services that we take for granted in our town. But that's just me putting in a plug for more town meetings. Okay. Any other questions or comments about upcoming events? Okay. If we,
I do have a comment or a question that's not related to the enterprise thing.
yeah,
I think it would be useful to just to keep an eye on our general schedule as to when we're hoping to pull together our report. So if you could discuss the key dates again, that would be useful.
okay. Yeah, and to that end, one of the things that we talked about at the beginning of the process was at what point we might want some sort of public input. And, you know, something like the enterprise budget hearing is actually a good place to announce a date for, or at least a plan to do something like that, when presumably there's at least a slightly wider audience of folks that are interested in the specifics. So if we might want to think about that. And of course we have, you know, tonight and 2 more meetings before that to decide if we have any content or any information that we want to put forward in that process. So generally speaking, what we're targeting is to, I think, create what we consider to be our first draft or a working copy of, of our report by the end of March. So we've talked about what sections were in it. And for tonight's meeting, well, and then we would update that, sort of try it for fit, update it, decide what major revisions it might need for a second draft, which we would plan to call our final report by the end of April, giving us the month of April in which to, meet with the light board, meet with other, the select board potentially, or hold public hearings where the content would be made known and discussed, and get an opportunity for some public feedback on it before, doing an actual final submission, which is officially going back to the select board. So, I think that really starting next week, we should find ourselves in the drafting and revising process. We started with the outline. I've updated the outline today, and we talked about this a little bit at last week's meeting. The idea behind the updates that I made was to go into the recommendation schedule section and try and flesh that section out a little bit and end each area, and I won't say that I got all of them right, with some kind of statement about what we think the task force might recommend. And we need to recognize that the document that we're going to look at tonight is what I wrote by myself, and its only purpose was to get something that I felt might reflect some of the discussion we've had already, for the purposes of having an actual discussion about what, if anything, we want to recommend in these areas. And of course, we could decide that we don't want to make a recommendation in a given area. And I'm sure that I know that there are recommended areas that we didn't talk about. For example, there is absolutely nothing in there yet about marketing broadband services, except for a slight allusion to the idea that there might be expenses associated with that. So and this was kind of work backwards from what we think we want to say, and then consider what supporting materials and explanation might be necessary in the lead up to those recommendations to make them consumable by the parties that we need to submit the report to. And I think we also need to make some statements about who are we recommending do what or adopt what policy. So that's kind of the process that I was envisioning. Any comments or suggestions about the process from anyone?
No, I think generally positive about what you just said. I do like I'll use the word annealing of the recommendations and the report. In other words, having some time in April to be able to get feedback and maybe give us the time to continue to reflect on everything we've discussed and make sure it's all in there. So generally, I feel positive about the approach.
Yeah. Okay.
I do have some comments relative to the recommendations. There
Okay.
are some that I think we could, I'm assuming that'll be later in the meeting, so I won't provide those now. Yeah.
So I had item 5 on the agenda because we did spend a fair amount of time at the last meeting kind of discussing what had taken place in the sort of select board process around deciding what the allocation of ARPA funds are. I don't have anything new to report or comment on there, although I did have one thought, which I haven't actually translated to math yet, but it occurred to me that there does seem to be a lot of support for the idea that the ARPA funding should be kind of directed into the normal town processes, and where possible recognize real revenue losses and impacts on operating budgets. And it had, I don't know why this hadn't occurred to me before, but in earlier meetings when we looked at the installation rate for broadband subscribers, we all easily saw that it went to essentially zero for most of 2021 and 2020 as well. And that suggests to me that there is a model case that was based on, let's call it, historical growth rates, and there's a gap in that. And it seemed that it might make sense to try to compute based on the plans going into 2020 and 2021 and the historical run rate, how many, how far behind the curve did broadband actually fall, and at least kind of have a number there as a potential pandemic impact based on the loss. Scott, it looks like you want to show us something.
Yeah, just because I realized we heard that the account installs dropped to zero, but here are the numbers that we got from broadband, and you can see that it did not in fact drop to zero. It went from 271 to 187 to 195.
Okay.
But it's still, it is identifiable. I mean, I thought we just had it, since we're going to talk about that, I just thought I'd grab the number and present it because it was,
leave that up there, because what I would, so that's good. So we could say, looks like about 90, if 187 should have been 270.
yeah, let me just do this for yucks. Let's make this 280 and 280. So that's a million, that's a good 100,000+ difference
Exactly.
in each two of those 2 years.
Yeah, and if we talk about the capacity to do something like fund a capital program for fiber construction, that $100,000,
it's more like, it'd be more like 2, I should think.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's likely $100,000 for the first year, and then the 100 from the first year plus another 100 from the second year. So, and that I think is at least a coherent possible impact that we might want to apply, over and above the discussions about whether or not, an allocation to broadband is a good thing. There's a difference there. You see, you're doing math on the fly.
Yeah, but I did it wrong, so never mind.
But if you have, it's a great spreadsheet. Maybe what you could do is do the calculation, essentially calculate what the delta between what actually happened and what one could have reasonably presumed would have happened had the growth rate continued. And you can even see that 2018 and 2019 were slightly down from previous years. But I think there's little doubt that when you call a moratorium on installations, you get less installations.
Right. Yeah. So
would it be possible to get a finer point on the year? Could they break it down by quarter, or maybe that's not necessary, but it just might.
Well, remember also, just as a quick reminder, the assertion has been, so that's the number, it's 175, but the assertion has been that from somewhere around the end of November to the beginning of April, installs die completely, right? That's
right. Yes, thanks.
So this model that I did actually used 6 months, the previous year's full 12 months, and then 6 months for the ones that were connected during that time. So
Yeah,
Okay, all right.
So
Okay.
every new connection, I only counted for 6 months of this minimum total revenue, but I counted 12 months of anything that was installed before. So-
yeah. The difference is though, that when you're looking at a multi-year event, the loss of let's say 100 or so installations in one year impacts the following year for the whole year of that loss, because you
Mhm.
don't, presumably that opportunity isn't made up. Like,
No, yeah,
it might be a little bit different if we saw, and maybe we will see, something exceeding the historical average in the year when we return to, normal operations. But we certainly haven't seen that yet either. And of course, maybe that's because normal operations hasn't resumed yet. Some
Yeah,
people.
by the way, this sheet takes that into account. So when I put 300 in here, the total subscribers for that at that particular time is what's used as the baseline
Yeah.
for the whole year calculation. So anyway.
Yeah, well, generally speaking, Mark, I think that's a great idea to, put that, do an
Yeah.
estimate of revenue lost or whatever the right words are. Finance is not my forte. So,
Yeah.
but, since we have the, if there's a historical rate and we can
Mhm.
estimate, this is without COVID and this is with COVID, and,
Yeah.
that would be very helpful.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's, I will, well, maybe with Scott's help, we'll do that math. And, it's obviously an exercise of a model, but I do think that it does to some extent speak to the resources that might have otherwise been available for capital construction, which I think is very much the element that's tends to be the target for what needs to happen if we want to ever see broadband completion or fiber completion actually occur. Okay. Any other comments on ARPA? Okay. Great. So let me pull up. Now we have too many. Let me pull up the report outline, and I will quickly make a new version, and so we can kind of engage in some markups. I know that this got to you guys this afternoon, so I will not, my feelings will not be hurt if anybody hasn't had a chance to actually.
I did have a chance to scan it, but that's about it. Yeah. I mean, I think there were some, the one thing that jumped out at me, and we'll get into that unless I missed it, which is, for example, we've discussed some alternate ways of solving the problem of getting the cable in the last 100, 200 feet, meaning like the ditch witch thing and the thing I sent around by the email. I'm assuming folks saw the email I found of this municipal broadband in Washington State. And when I started Googling around for burying fiber using a vibratory plow, which is what this ditch witch thing is, I stumbled across first the YouTube and then backtracked and found the link to a municipal broadband that uses exactly that for extending the fiber to the homes. And it's in Washington State. I sent an email with a link, and I'll take the action and put it in the minutes here so it's memorialized. But I thought that was quite interesting. And they've thought through everything, including liability issues and waivers and what it costs to do it and so forth and so on. Maybe that should be in the recommendation somewhere. Again, my view is that what we should be providing is a set of tools that the consumers can draw on, financial tools, recommendations, tools of processes and operations to expand and extend the broadband.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a good idea. Let's see. So We're going to primarily deal with section 4. Sections 1, 2, and 3 are basically still there to retain numbering. I know there are some of you who volunteered to work on those previous sections. So I'm suggesting that we go directly to the bottom of page 2 in the document and start in on there. And at a high level, I had organized the possible recommendations into policy recommendations, which is section A. Recommend metrics for tracking, which is section B. Governance, which is C. Process for setting strategic planning goals and budgeting process, which is E. Capital planning process, which is F, and additional follow-up work, which is G. But Scott, you just added a whole new category, which we could call H, which is, construction standards or something like that.
Yeah, it could include things of that nature. And I don't know where we plan to put the whole discussion about piggybacking roads work with the cable deployment. That's a whole other subject we spent some time on, which I think is something that should be part of our recommendations as well. Don't you agree?
Oh yeah, I definitely. Would logistics be it, or implementation or something?
Yeah, these could be like
category
it could be just something like implementation recommendations to consider. And I would actually couch it that way, to consider. So they may come back and say, well, we can't do that here because ground freezes, or there may be some perfectly good reason. I don't want to be in I feel like that's the way we should come at it personally.
Yeah, I think there's is it WITCH? Is that how they?
Yeah, you can use vibratory plow. That's the more official name. Ditch Witch is a brand name. So
Yeah.
if you follow a link to the Mason Public Utility District, they talk about fiber optic service being installed with a vibratory plow, which is actually the way it works. It shakes the thing as it pulls it into the ground. And they, interestingly enough, they do direct fiber bury. They don't, which surprised me. They don't pull it through even a flexible conduit.
So, and the essence of this, to be direct about it and start right, is that we're actually recommending that less expensive construction techniques.
In this particular case, absolutely, yeah. This is not the same as putting a conduit for a Tesla.
In order to,
we're not burying it 4 feet. We're not carrying kilovolts and megawatts of power. We're carrying, some photons. Period.
Yeah, because of the completion more quickly and at a lower cost. I'm a terrible typist.
Yeah, I could certainly see this as, someone that lives 300, 400 feet away from the road that wants to have access. They don't want to drag it through the trees. They might be happy to have either Concord Broadband or a separate contractor. And that's actually another aspect of this. So again, just to touch, since we're down this rat hole for the moment, this Mason Public Utility, they provide that service from the utility itself. So you actually contract them to do it. You have to sign a waiver. I didn't study the waiver, but I'm betting dollars that it's got some nice things to protect the town from any, oh, you damaged my tree or some other thing. The alternative for this, so this is a fundamental question, is whether Concord Broadband would simply point those customers to an authorized third-party contractor to do that SEMSAID service. So, that would actually be potentially a decision. The light plant board would have to make a decision about that, whether they want to do that directly or contract it.
Yeah, good. And that's one that I didn't happen to get written up, but certainly still has been on the radar, and it's good to get it documented in here. I'm gonna know that track changes is still on in this, and I'm saving this as a new version, but I'm going to make the screen more easily readable by not showing you all the change tracking that it's doing. It also makes it easier for me to find my numerous typos. Okay, so great. And if we have any other thoughts, let's have at them. What I was
Can we kind of walk through it together?
yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to suggest is why don't we go down through the points and what I'm really hoping for here is agreement or modification or suggestions about what the recommendations actually say. So beginning at the bottom of page 2, in the area of, so this section is to establish, you know, to provide what the recommendations are. And some of these are kind of big thorny issues, but you know, the first issue on policy is an articulation, and I didn't actually try to take a position here, but a policy objective of CMLP to provide an opportunity to receive telecommunication. Oh, I guess I did. So universal access, do we recommend that there be a policy around universal access? And if so, how is that going to be defined? And so my initial version for this was the policy of CMLP to try to provide an opportunity to receive telecommunications services to every premise that is also served by electric service. This recognizes that the fiber network is a community asset and that there is a commitment to equalize access to the asset for all residents and businesses within the town. So that was one way of stating that. I'm sure there are other ways. I'm sure there are refinements, but this is, you know, so it's kind of inviting a discussion there. And then I went into the beginning of some definitions about what's an unserved location. And this may not belong here, but the essence of the universal access idea is building on that point. Do we have does anybody want to weigh in on that concept and how it might be articulated, or whether they agree or disagree with the way it is articulated?
I agree. I mean, I think there's maybe even an argument that Article 41 stated this, that, which I don't have it in front of me, but yeah, I mean, it looks pretty good to me.
Okay.
Or maybe it would be helpful to tie back to the article just for
Yeah, it's, I
completeness.
think it is useful to do that. I mean, a comparison could be the you know, number of times, for example, that the article, I believe it's 51, is referenced in almost all the sustainability and climate goals. So, and that could be, you know, that was the 21 town meeting, right? 22 town meeting? 22. 21 town meeting. I just, someday Article 41 means something different every year, so. But that's fair. And, you know, to that end, an implementation of sort of a universal access policy is a broader adoption. If we think Article 41 already adopted that, or if we think there's more work to be done across the town to make sure that that is recognized as a goal. And the reasoning for that, I think, would be that at some point, if you are operating on a universal access goal as opposed to, or policy, as opposed to a, you know, make money for in everything you do policy, there's tension there. Some specific instances may not be economically viable, and yet you do them anyway if it's a policy, which is why I think it's important that some statement around where that is be brought forward in the report.
Yeah, so the language of the article, I believe, I'm looking at the current one, or the last one. Of course, I got a million of them on my hard drive here. the town urged the town manager to increase the availability of municipal fiber optic telecommunications service, period. And then the charge for the committee would include expediting the installation of fiber optic telecoms utility service on the remaining 5% of town streets. So I think it's, that you could say that the Article 41 expressed the goal of putting it in all the streets, right? So you could extrapolate to that, like once it's in the street, then it, there's an opportunity to receive telecom service. So it wasn't as specific as I thought, but it was more about like getting it in all the streets. I mean, if it's 95% of them, why not do the last 5%? So,
Yeah.
but I think it's important, when you think about who's benefiting, it's the customers, right? Like, doesn't do anyone any good if it's just in the street.
Yeah. Okay, so I would actually be supportive of the idea of a recommendation that suggested, strengthening the support for universal access as a concept and a value, and then seeking some level of validation of that, let's call it, as a policy that was formally approved by the light board, or even possibly at a future town meeting, an article could be brought forward like the Sustainable Energy Committee did, asking for town approval of these goals. And sort of, I think that Concord has a long tradition of kind of codifying what its goals are as a way of ensuring that there's some accountability across the years to attain them. So that's good. I'm going to keep moving. I'm going to say, well, let's move this third party thing because I don't really like where it's landed, and I know there's other stuff coming up. A policy around expanding outside, the existing service territory, and these are to some extent not in any particular order, certainly not in order of importance, but it is true that CMLP is allowed to expand the fiber network outside the electric service territory. And there may be valid, reasons to do that. I mean, one real live example is that there is an actual connection to Carlisle's municipal fiber network for the express purposes of facilitating communications between the public safety departments and so forth. Carlisle paid for getting that done, and it works. It gives Carlisle access to public safety radio facilities in Concord, like the broadcast towers. So it's important, and it was done. That's just one example. This sort of encompasses the idea that at some point in the process, strategic decisions need to be made about that. So a process of evaluating whether it's appropriate to do that. The strategic business plan for telecommunications should be conducted periodically, and I'm saying at least every 5 years, which broadly considers the option, among others, and assesses the sort of business fundamentals and the long range goals. But I would actually say that at this stage of the game, the task force would not recommend considering expansion of the service territory until a more rigorous assessment of, the business opportunity and the sustainability is completed for the current territory. In other words, we're not finished with the territory that we're trying to cover now. There are gaps and infill issues that need to be addressed. So I think it's important to raise this as a strategic imperative, but also say, we're not thinking about that right now.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Gordon.
Yeah, thank you, Gail. I think that expansion might actually make the most sense in the diversification of services that you mentioned a second ago, because the populace may not support certain business oriented type things like you just mentioned with Carlisle, right? So actually having a bigger footprint might make such a venture more sustainable, more viable, economically viable. I'm sorry, I while you were discussing and went ahead, I dug back and looked at Article 41,
Mhm.
the language.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be careful about claiming that its charge endorses any one of these particular items. It's the way I read Article 41 is it's a study about increasing access, but it doesn't say that. Well, because I just want to back up to the previous goal, if you don't mind for a second, Scott. Mark. This goal was expressed by Article 41 from town meeting, universal access. Now, I know that like at the time, when we discussed this at the light board meeting, Stephen Crane, who's out of the picture now, said that he was opposed to the idea of taking on a commitment, a must-serve commitment. Okay.
But what Stephen Crane said isn't what the article said.
Yeah, I just
But
want to
we're
be
working
careful that just
Yeah.
because the article was approved, that we can't, that we're not really in a position to use that as evidence. I think that it's clear that the article asked the town to do better than it's doing. Right. And I totally support that. And I think the light board does too, but I just want to, a policy position having to do with like, must serve or something like that. That's clearly beyond the scope of what town meeting even talked about. I did a search. There's the word universal doesn't occur in the warrant so I just want to be careful because, if we're allowed to do it here, every one of the other goals were on I, 3 I's, so forth. You could stick it in those too.
Yeah, Gordon, I think what I was trying to say, and I do agree with you, is that if we really wanted to take the position that as sort of it's written here, that our expectation is that eventually this will in fact do this. I do think that it's, from a Concord process perspective, it's sort of imperative that we say that out loud and ask people to directly answer that particular question. It's not okay to say, hey, that got slipped under, because I think we were all there, right? Article 41 was covered in about 10 minutes on a hot soccer field on a June afternoon, with a lot of great things and very nice things said, and we were happy to get it. But I don't think there are very many people in that crowd who really thought we were sort of committing the town to build fiber to everyone. And if we think that that's a good idea, and I happen to actually do think that that is a good idea,
Yeah,
I think it's a good idea to make sure that the rest of the army is going to be behind us when we do it, and we should make that case should be made, or it should be made by again an appropriate board. So we're not going to be here as a task force to get that, but we might encourage one of the standing boards to take up that goal and do it, and say why we think they should.
Yeah,
I guess I don't understand.
It's a fine point.
Well, to me, I'm a little confused why we're even debating this, because in the end of the day, we've acknowledged many times that nothing we're doing here is anything but recommendation. Right. So whether or not we recommend, if we, I think in my view, I think we should be able to take as much license to say any recommendation that has the end result of improving the access of Concord broadband to the community, to increase the number of people that can access it. Any recommendation that falls under that is fine. And one of those recommendations could say this should be it could be a policy, and the policy could drive availability.
I'm trying to make, I agree, Scott. I think that you're right.
So why are we spending time on this?
This report should it's perfect. I agree with recommending universal access, defined as anybody who wants it can get it. But I think that look, it's not the end of the world if we overstate our case, but I don't think it's true. The town meeting directed us
Right.
to make this, the goal may have been expressed by the Article 41. I don't think the town meeting endorsed this. We are, and we can make a good case for it, but we can't tell the people that they've already made this decision. So they
I
didn't.
agree with that. And I think that even if,
Oh,
even if
sure.
we thought that was the case, as a recommendation, the recommendation is to clearly adopt the policy. And let's be clear, as we contemplate what the end state of these recommendations are, the next step in our process is going to be that we need to actually make sure that the report contains a substantive rationale for why we think that is the case. And so that if we're handing it to the light board and saying, hey, go, put this universal access policy in place, we should give them enough to go on to say, yeah, we agree with it, and we want to take it forward, and it makes sense to us. That I think is what we're trying to do here. And what I'm trying to do, because time is so short, is like, let's make sure we know what those endpoints are that we're driving towards, so that what we deliver is focused to those positions that we think are important to take.
Okay, sorry for, I mean, this, I'm dragging down, and it's so hard to get anything done in meetings when you've got 5 people with each of their own perspectives. Honestly, if you could just change the words to like, this goal is consistent with the sense of town meeting, maybe that's fine too. I just don't want to say, it's a little bit like when I was a kid and like I wanted to get my sibling to do something. I could tell him to do it, but I could also say that my parent told them to do it. I'm invoking a higher authority, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're doing here, and I don't think it's fair.
Yeah, okay. And we're not at the wordsmithing stage, but I do. So let me kind of capture all the points, and then we'll
Okay.
obviously be
Yeah,
writing
sorry.
to that. So
Yeah.
clarification and another authorization should be sought because prior action was not specific to this goal. I think we could all agree with that. And the next one is kind of a question. But so that's sort of, I mean, I think I put one of the most controversial ones up front, which is probably a mistake, because we could have rolled a little bit better. But then, understand that the idea is to build a rationale and build out what that is, and say what that rationale would include, the pros and the cons to doing it. I mean, one of the cons is that it does kind of tie you to doing some things that are possibly not financially, wouldn't hold up financially by themselves. And one of the pros to doing it, obviously, is that there's benefits that may accrue in other areas, and hopefully some of these other recommendations will do that. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, so I think the expanding out, unless somebody wants to really go review expanding outside the service territory, I look at that as very far down the road.
I actually not sure why that's in here.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. I think that's a little outside the, maybe we could put it in like the extras or the miscellaneous ideas, because I mean, I think it's a totally valid concept. And if, Carlisle wants to like press the town to do it, and the town decides to do it, I mean, I just don't think it's within the scope of Article 41, because it's just sort of outside of helping people get fiber to their homes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I actually think it's just something more to support this concept of that it's outside of scope, which is I would think we would much more give a priority to addressing those homes for which the optical cable already passes in Concord, but it's not connected, as opposed to let's go to the next town over and try and find a customer when we have customers here that we haven't served. And that's, that's back to this, again, I haven't tried to figure out where this, we've talked about this revenue wheel of growth concept, which is increase the subscribers that are easy to reach, which in turn creates more funding that we can reach subscribers that are hard to reach. I don't know if that's explicitly in here anywhere. Haven't seen it so far, but
There is a little bit about that up above. And remember, this is to some extent all in a section called policies. And
okay, yeah,
when
yeah.
I think about policies, I'm thinking about what are those, horizon line, guide points. And, and the first one is who are we trying to get to? And the second one is to some extent, who are we not trying to get to? Right. So as a guiding light pole star sort of thought. The third one under policies is this notion around support for economic vitality, sustainability, and equity. And in this item, additional benefits might accrue from successfully. I really need to proofread this better. Successfully accomplishing the primary mission, which is fiber, fiber everywhere. So we could establish linkages to other programs, like the affordable housing. So last week we talked a little bit about maybe the task force recommends that fiber connect all affordable housing units, as they are built. And again, this is one of those kind of supporting the universal access thought, but it says if we ever wanted to have something to enable an internet essentials type program, one could reasonably assume that one population, internet essentials, I wish I could type or spell or something. Oh well. And those units might be a large scale target for that, but if we don't have any fiber to those units, we couldn't even offer internet essentials like service if we wanted to.
Actually, yeah, this is a nit, so never mind.
Okay, sustainability, TBD. I don't know what the recommendations are, but I think there might be a recommendation to follow up to establish some kind of strategic integrations between sustainability. There's a lot of thinking that Internet of Things and high-speed connectivity enables that. You could make a case here that, that this links to the AMI program, the advanced metering infrastructure.
Well, I would say if that AMI allows wired solutions, which I'm hoping that it will. I mean, one of my things with fiber is that, it's made with glass and it transfers light. And that is one of the town's sustainability goals has to do with reducing dependence on metals and minerals. And the wireless stuff uses a lot of specialized materials that get dug out of the ground and usually get tossed in a few years when they're obsolete. And fiber is more sustainable in that sense. I'm not sure how to get that wording there, but it lasts longer, and it's a more sustainable material.
Yeah. Okay. I just put uses fewer problematic materials as a way to capture that thought a little bit. Obviously, again, this is mostly just to trigger how it gets written out. I'm sensing some support in the public safety area, communications network. There's a lot of discussion about public safety and resilience to climactic events and things like obviously your communications infrastructure in the face of major weather events and those kinds of things can be very important. Education, the only thing I could think of was schools to residents. We already support the school buildings as a sort of major tenant for the fiber network itself, in dark fiber leasing, but there might be other again, this is just kind of a laundry list. Government access, the PEG thing has come up, and I know I beat it to death the other day, and I'm not looking to reopen that can of worms, but I did plant it here that said, there's clearly a desire to support, to provide ongoing support for some of the PEG access services, and there has been, it's already been tapped to do that. All I'm saying is that since that's happened, the origin and the parameters are not clearly established by citizen governance bodies for exactly how much that payment is and why and what the rationale is. And I would suggest that we recommend that the rationale be clearly documented and adopted somewhere. Just, I'm not saying do it or not. I'm just saying let's make sure that it's clear why that's done. Similar to the pilot payment that the light plant pays right now, but that's always a subject of a lot of discussion. So the second,
the idea of double paying is an interesting one, but I don't think we should really explore it. In fact, it could turn out that we may not actually double pay. I don't know. It's a very obscure accounting task, which doesn't really, I don't think it yields that much.
Right. The only thing I think that is a kind of a concern from, I think, my perspective on this is that when you whatever resources are being directed in this way are obviously not available for capital construction of fiber.
Exactly. Yeah,
So,
that's really the key point. And I mean, I don't know. I can't do the math in my head, but I kind of have the feeling that the double payment only amounts to a small amount. I'm not sure.
It's
why.
de minimis now.
Yeah.
I think the problem is stuff like that grows. So let's look at metrics. This is a more straightforward area. And I think it might accomplish some of the things that we really will find non-controversial, but and I had promised to, in previous meetings, to sort of elucidate this a little bit, but the parcels served, so it's designed as the count of residential and business parcels with fiber access is documented in the town's GIS. So I think that's a clear definition. And currently, there are 6,131 entries that are denoted with a status of available in the spreadsheets that we received. And, I think it's straightforward to say this is a metric that we think should, standardize published definition and the regular reporting process.
Did you elaborate the MAT acronym elsewhere?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's actually down right below master address table.
Yeah, I knew it was, but I'm
Unfortunately, I used it after, so master address table units served, but yeah.
I would actually, just from a readability viewpoint, it should always be with the first time it's used. Either just put it in parentheses, just so people aren't like, okay, what does this mean? I'm pet peeve because
I might have moved something. It might have been there, or
no, that's fine. I'm just saying that
I agree with that.
When it was in the header of this one, which is the second metric, master address table unit served or served rate, which is defined as the number of master address table lists as available divided by the total entries, excluding entries for.
I think it's from a readability and customer consuming, blah, blah, blah. It's okay to repeat them.
Sure.
So don't even bother to take it out of the second reference, but.
Yeah, I won't. Because I feel like that's a header, so in this one, when I looked at this data, and we've looked at it a few times, the denominator of this, which is all of the entries exclude, and we just, as a simple matter, excluded open space and undeveloped parcels. But I noticed that in that data set, there were a bunch that were listed as apartment main or condo mains, which may just be groups of other entries to lead to some double counting. So this current calculation of 6,131 divided by 80,023, which leads to 76.4%, may or may not be accurate, depending on if you decide that those 349 need to be taken out of the denominators or something else. So again, some refinement of, is this really the number, or is this just an estimate of the number? So again, standardized published definition and a regular reporting process. I think both of those serve over the long time of just understanding where we are. The third metric that I'm offering up is this notion of, road miles served out of total road miles. We noted last time that there are about 15 road miles that have yet to be served. Well, I went back into that data and discovered that I can't, in the data, the way it was provided to us, it doesn't include how many, if a road is actually served, it's listed as 0 in that file, 0 miles in that file. So, we need another source for what's that total. So again, just a standardized and published definition of that would be very helpful. And all of this is really leading up to how do we, what process are we suggesting for understanding progress? There's quite a few of these subscribers as monthly billed subscription is reported by the billing system. Subscriber report growth should be reported as net of installation and cancellations. And we could recommend monthly internal reporting and inclusion in the Lightboard packet. I think that was already committed, but I'm not aware that it actually is really done every single month. And that's different. There's a difference in philosophy there, because I don't think anybody ever seriously wonders whether people are, taking our electric service, for example. And it kind of, some of this feeds into these next few numbers, which I do think are important for managing the business. Take rate, which is subscribers per divided by master address table units served. So that's a industry metric that's a measure of efficiency. A higher take rate generally is correlated with better business returns, and the take rate can also reasonably be thought of as the market share. And so based on some calculations we also did in an earlier meeting in the same data we were looking at, I believe it was November 2021, we had 1,552 subscribers out of those 6,131 parcels served, which is a take rate of approximately 25%. It's an important number, as we've already previously talked about, because it will not grow to forever. Obviously, you could sooner or later get to 100%, but in a competitive environment, you're never going to get to 100%. So it's important to know what you are driving towards. And there might be also a difference when we think about, so those are the potential customers that we really have, but there's also another version of this based on, how many parcels are we not serving? So the ways to affect overall revenue have to do with either increasing the take rate or increasing the number of opportunities for a subscriber. But
can I stop you for just a procedural question here? Are you planning to attach the edited version of this document to the minutes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm working on
that's all. I just want to make sure, because I'm just going to keep referring to the document.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So Mark, if we've talked before about, what's the percentage of Concord residents that would take the service? and we've speculated it's not going to be 100%. Let's say it's going to be half. Then if we're at a quarter, then the take rate is the difference between a half and a quarter. Is that right?
Exactly. And this is important because, trying to understand where you are along that growth curve is very key. So number or letter II here, task force recommends that that the strategic business plan for telecommunications establish a maximum take rate assumption and use this expectation for planning, marketing, and capital construction expenses to ensure that there is business justifications for investment as well as forecasted returns on investment that can be assessed and refined. So this is really saying, what we're going to say is recognize this and manage to it, figure out where you are on this, because, we had the discussion earlier this evening. We see a decline in installations. That could be because you're approaching, suppose the maximum percentage of people that are ever going to take this service in Concord is 26%.
Yeah, this is actually something I was thinking about. Absolutely. And I don't know how we can actually, I don't know how we can get to a number that we can, or if we can get to a number that would recommend what what saturation is. We know from Braintree, they ended up generally splitting it 3 ways between Comcast, Fios, and themselves, but that was a apples to apples thing because in all 3 cases they were delivering content and broadband and every internet connectivity. Here, it's not an apples to apples, and so I think it might be very challenging to try and predict what the take rate might be unless we did some sort of survey amongst the people that don't have it now to see how many of them would add it. That would be the only way I could think of to actually get there.
I agree. It seems pretty challenging. And then, some people have Comcast as well as Concord Fiber.
Oh, absolutely.
And then in the future, who knows, like there may be other services, or maybe Comcast like doubles their price, or, the competition might change in some way that would help or hurt the market for Concord. I mean, I guess like on a year-to-year basis, maybe they could have an assumption based on the current state of things. But yeah, it seems pretty challenging to come up with that number, especially like given the fact that there's like zero marketing.
And that's a really good point, but you recognize the words here is there's a maximum take rate assumption that is in the business plan.
Okay.
And you can either have that, you can either be working to that number, or you can be just saying, well, we'll see what happens. Those are kind of the choices. And what I think we're in a position to recommend is that there be a strategic business planning process that tries to establish what that number is, for better or for worse, and then kind of manage to it. And it should be tracked over time and reported out so that we understand how are we doing with it. And some of the other measurements below, I think, will also help us understand that. But we know, based on information we get from other service providers, that one can assume that 97 or 98% of all premises, or all residences anyway in Concord, have internet service. Everybody's got it because they want it. So we know what the market size is. The question is how much of that market is available to us, and that does have a lot to say about how much resources available for things like spending on capital to try and get to everybody else. And again, both of these numbers can be worked on. So this denominator number, the master address service units served, could go up, and that could also increase the overall size of the business. But I think it's an important concept to understand, and I think a discussion of why it's important belongs in this paper, because it will help us also think about the resources that are available for fiber construction.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that as a concept, but I mean, but what about the idea of making it available to everyone? I mean, that, you know, I mean, that's kind of like a basic thing that, oh, but only if they take it and only if they buy it and we get X amount of dollars from them, you know, it kind of feel like you can't have it both ways.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure how to reconcile that.
That's an interesting point. And of course, one thing that we often do, and it probably deserves some discussion in our report, is we're sort of interchangeable about the internet service and the fiber. But we know when we look at it a little bit more carefully that the fiber can enable a large number of things beyond just internet service. And there might be reasons to have that. And, you know, connecting every place for some purpose other than selling an internet subscription is you know, potentially a valid activity if there was such a need. It's expensive. It would cost a fair amount to do that. But be that as it may, this is about sort of an understanding of what the metric is and what the limits on the metric are. And all we're saying is it's a very good number to understand at all times, because you can get yourself into big trouble if you start, you know, investing in ways that you know can never be supported by sort of that underlying rate. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
I think that if we assume that subscribers contribute pretty much equally to the revenue base once they're on board, then tracking our progress towards achieving the goal of a certain number of subscribers makes some sense. It's not a perfect metric, like Gail pointed out. There's some limitations on how well it represents our ability to actually reach some users, or implement the you know, the universal access idea. But one thing it also doesn't capture is all of these difficulties we've spent so much time talking about, particularly in multi dweller units, but also on the unfinished streets, that, you know, they just pose problems. And I don't know, it's pretty clear to me that a number like that, saying, oh yeah, we're 3/4 of the way there, doesn't really capture how hard it is to get that last that last percentage.
Yeah.
You know, particularly when the hardest stuff gets left last. So I don't know. I guess I'll just say it's not a perfect metric, but I think as long as it's not burdensome to produce it, it's probably limited by the accuracy of the model in the first case. We don't know what the ideal percentage is, you know, or the desired the target really is. You could, so
There's one element of that that may be indicative, and unfortunately right now we've got the noise of COVID thrown in there, but if for the rate of net takes as it declines, even though in the face of no other changes in marketing and other things, that may suggest that we're asymptotically approaching some limit in terms of the business. Right.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, honestly, to tell progress towards completion, I don't think this is that great. I mean, what you'd really want to do is a bottom up, saying, okay, how many difficult projects are there? We've already named the 50 streets, right? Yeah. How many of those 50 streets did you get done this year?
Right. And
but
I actually,
like I say, a metric doesn't have to be perfect either.
Well, and this last point that I just put on the screen is really, I think what it tells us about is that there's some implication here about what resources are available now or might be available in the future to support the further construction of the network. If we assume that the preferred method of funding completion of the fiber network is that the fiber network pays for itself to be completed, then the resources that are available in the system now with the subscribers that we have now that's the revenue stream that's available, that's available to do that further construction. And we should try to be as honest and frankly, conservative as we can about what's going to be available, because it doesn't make sense to put together a $10 million construction plan if it's going to take 20 years or even 40 years to get $10 million to do it. That's kind of, unless maybe what would have to happen is a borrowing or some other method. So if we think about how are we going to pay for getting the fiber constructed the rest of the way, this is the temptation to say, well, we'll just do it out of the revenue. This gives us at least one way of thinking about how that revenue may or may not be limited in the future.
Yeah. One thing I've also think of, as you talk through that again, I keep thinking about a piece of, and I don't know if it'll be in our report or not. We've identified where those properties are that aren't served. We've identified, we're classifying them. We're bundling them into sort of groups that make sense to group them, 52 groups, I think.
Yeah.
And then within those, there'll be groups that are similar in nature, right? But we haven't tried to put a range on what it would cost to solve each of those as a group, and then all of them as a total. We don't know, and I don't know if that's in our scope, but I suspect it kind of is, or at least in a range, and maybe it's a fairly wide range. Maybe it's plus or minus 30 or 40%, but it's a number that we could put to this and say, of these 52 groups of places that are unserved, we did a tertiary analysis, maybe it's a very back of the envelope thing. It says, okay, each one of these, we've assigned an upper and lower limit to how much it would cost to solve those problems. And here's the total of that. And then that in turn drives the business and the revenue and the policy.
Yeah, Gail gave us some good data from 2018 that was generated by CTC in that report that I think gave us a potential starting point that could at least begin to ballpark it. And I think we can propose a methodology. It's not in here yet, but I think that exercise is one that should be included, probably in a different section than the recommendation section, but
no, it should be part of the problem statement,
Yeah, analysis of the cost of doing this. Anyway, let's see, we're getting kind of close to the end of the metric section. So I think just a couple more that are a little bit fairly straightforward. Churn is an industry metric that indicates customer loyalty and stability of expected revenue streams. So it's typically calculated as a count of subscriptions that are terminated in a given period of time divided by the total subscriptions for that same period. So, if you have 100 subscriptions and you lose one, you have 1% churn, but churn rate, especially in cable contracts and so forth, tends to be fairly high. CMLPs tends to be pretty low. The analyzing churn can provide insights into customer satisfaction. In other words, when it's going up, customers are less satisfied. And it's also useful in denoting customer value. So when we think about what might it be worth it to spend to acquire a customer, understanding what the likelihood that they're going to leave in a year or 2 years or 3 years. So if the churn rate is down and I think it is in Concord's case, down in the 1-2% range, that's like saying, annually, you can expect that once you get a customer, you get to kind of keep them forever, which makes their revenue stream, even if it's a modest monthly fee, quite valuable, as opposed to, if you ran out of present value calculation on people, leave on the average of after 10 years or something like that. That's pretty good money and makes it easier to justify more expensive installation activities. To be straight about it.
Oh, that brings up an interesting idea. I have no idea if this would be one of our recommendations, but I just flashed on it, which is if, let's say, there is an installation that costs more, we don't necessarily want to. And by the way, we did talk about this whole model of, I can't remember the terminology now, but we should not lose track of this one where if the homeowner needs subsidy, which can become indebtedness that gets amortized over 20 years to solve connecting this. There's a term, Mark, you had talked about this, where that basically just gets taxed onto their taxes, and
Betterment, yeah.
Yeah. But that should be something that somehow is part of this discussion and recommendations.
Yep. Yeah, I think we're not going to get to that tonight, but I just made a note of that for future.
Well,
So
I mean,
that's
but I guess I'm sorry, my final point around that was if there's mechanisms like betterment or other things like that, maybe part of that could actually, that policy recommendation that goes with that is, it's somewhat tied together, which is the policy might be if Concord Light spends more than $3,000 making your installation, your commitment for early cancellation becomes more severe. Like maybe it's 3 years or 5 years or some other mechanism like that, as opposed to the one, whatever it is now. And I think so. I'm just thinking that that's another knob that could be applied here, and it's interrelated to the betterment concept, but it's slightly different. So
yeah, that's an interesting idea, and it might fit sort of generally into the concept of sort of this is not the word we should use, but creative financing of installations. Getting more creative about that instead of being quite so binary. Let's cover this last metric, and then we'll get into the governance section, which is a little bit later. But so installations, installations are representing new subscriptions in the billing system. However, there is a subtle difference that's important to delineate between reconnections of previously installed premises and first-time installations of fiber at a premise. And if we think about that, that means that installations should be reported as new connections and reconnections should be tracked separately. This is what I'm saying we might want to recommend as resubscriptions, which are, and reconnections can be tracked separately as either resubscriptions, so somebody who canceled before comes back, same customer, or transfers, I move out of my house and Gail moves in and she takes the service now. That's neither one of those is actually an installation, it's a reconnection, but it's a reconnection. And the reason is because that's it's an order of magnitude, in fact, maybe 2 orders of magnitude cheaper to reconnect something than to do a new installation. And the distinctions between these cases also represents underlying growth in the service and a reflection of the take rate. So it's, my suggestion is I think that the installations can be tracked as, in different ways and mean different things. And if you only count on subscriber numbers to tell it and assume that you understand what's going on in installations, you may be missing important trends in the business.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a great idea. I guess it kind of, if you look at the overall total, if someone moves out of town, they're no longer a customer, someone else moves in, and then they get added. But I guess anyway, it is important to just differentiate between those.
Yeah, and this whole section is really just about, I think that it's worthwhile for us to use this document as a way to sort of clarify and improve the precision of the language gets used when talking about the fiber network and broadband. And so if we surface these things, surface these distinctions and suggest some terminology for it, I think everybody will be the better, because the conversations will simply be more focused and precise.
There's another concept which probably doesn't need to be tracked here, but it's like, you know, an abandoned connection
Yeah,
actually is valuable because
yeah,
it represents an increase in the size of the overall footprint. But it doesn't generate any revenue, and it just represents a lower cost going forward. So I don't know if it's really worth keeping track of.
I don't know if it's worth keeping track of, but if you think about what it would do in the take rate, the numerator goes down by 1 and the denominator stays the same. So your percentage, your take rate.
Exactly. Yeah, and right, and that was another thing I was to say, that number 7 here actually overlaps a bit with the take rate.
Yeah, it does, and but insight into, if we're talking about installations as new connections to, and what I meant there, and probably should say, to the fiber, or fiber plant, or an actual extension of the plant, which is what happens the first time fiber is installed at a premise. And then that those abandoned connections or reconnections are a different thing, and an opportunity too, because, for example, it's the policy, if one homeowner moves out and another homeowner moves in, the second homeowner pays the $150 installation fee anyway, which is actually, much closer to covering the actual cost of, an equipment change, and then the first $150, which really didn't cover the actual cost of doing that whole construction activity. Okay. Here's some, I notice we're at 8 o'clock, so we could make a choice here. We could come back to the next sections. I think you guys have the hang of this now. Or these next ones are a little bit fuzzier, but let me just highlight what they are by category. So the idea of governance was tracking the progress against the completion. So making some suggestions about, who does things, maybe most of us are probably familiar with RACI frameworks, responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed, if you've ever done any sort of business process re-engineering. But, so tracking completion of the fiber network, the telecom staff is responsible, the light board is informed, and, so it kind of answers the who does what and what the responsibilities are. Also in governance might be some rate of return policies. So, what is the expectation for the financial stability of the light plant? What are retained earnings policies and those kinds of things? Process for the third major section here, or fourth major section rather, D, is a process for setting strategic goals. So this might be where we actually say, what kinds of things should be done here? A market study to establish the total opportunity represented in the served. So this kind of answers that. What is the expected take rate? Like, how much demand is there really? We've been surveying people for years, asking whether they would take the service, and a lot of them have said yes and yet not done it. And then we could get into some of those inhibitors, and setting those subscription targets, premises served, some consideration of what service offerings. I made a list of service offerings. The current ones are residential internet with optional routing and Wi-Fi, small business internet with optional routing and Wi-Fi, private virtual networks, and dark fiber leasing. Those are the things we do today. The competitive and adjacent offerings might be wireless internet, cellular tower, wireless tower backhaul, voice services, video services, and there's probably others. I just kind of made a list of, really sort of logical things. And again, this goes to that sort of question that we touched on earlier about what businesses are we in. Backhaul, for anybody that doesn't know it, that's an industry term for the necessary communications that a wireless facility like a cell tower needs with the network. So when your communications to that cell tower hits that cell tower, it's usually transferred over fiber optics into the internet. It doesn't like get transmitted to another tower or something like that. So that wireless backhaul is a very lucrative business for fiber networks.
So, Mark, are you saying that right now Concord doesn't offer that or doesn't do that? I don't know.
We don't do it. It's something that's typically done by middle mile and fiber access carriers, or Verizon or somebody will do it. For Verizon will do it for Verizon Wireless and AT&T and T-Mobile, or they'll actually lay their own fiber. Comcast does it for some. So there are fibers. If you go to any of the cell tower facilities in town, what you'll see is that there is fiber there from a number of different providers, mostly, and we're not in that business, but we could be. And certainly there's a lot of thought that if 5G networks ever materialize, there'll be a lot more sort of tower locations that need need fiber connections in order to function.
Yeah. I mean, that's going to be a little, I suspect that might end up being circular because the service providers, it's the big players that are doing that. And so
but
we might find ourselves leasing dark fiber and turning around and trying to provide bandwidth, and with the dark fiber we just leased back to the company. Yeah, maybe to me it strikes me as a niche and a narrow margin business, but
yeah, they will often deal with whoever actually has fiber to the existing facilities at the time. Anyway,
the other thing, Mark, is that this belongs in the discussion because it's an item where Concord Municipal Telecom has a natural advantage in Concord. So
yeah, and this is really just remember what's this section under. This is like a process for setting strategic planning goals and around marketing and growth. And one of the things to consider is, are you offering the services that you need to be offering in order to run the business or that you want to be offering? And so the idea is that periodically the service offerings should be reviewed. And I'm saying at least every 5 years, we should, somebody should think about, are we offering the right things? Are we, on the network?
Yeah. And the other, we talked to Scott always talks about, and I agree, virtuous circle.
Yeah.
These are opportunities to make that grow faster, right? And that could then circle back and create the resources we need to solve some of the hard cases.
Yeah. So these are different ways of monetizing the fiber network.
Would the earlier idea that we kind of thought belonged somewhere else belong here, which was out of territory?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Why don't I do that? I'll move that down here. And this is really, I think what this is this is in the recommendation section. This is more a list of things to think about planning, to consider planning every so often.
Sure.
Not necessarily a recommendation to go do these things, just you got to think about what business you're in and how it is. Business return. I put a straw man together about this idea, which is saying the business has a return. We're familiar with, it's mandated by the DPU for the electric stuff, but I was thinking about something that might look something like, any 0 to 5% return is sent to operating reserves up to some target level of reserves, which is operated by policy. That's saying you got to make sure that you have what you're going to need in case of emergency, right?
Yeah.
And that should be the first call on a return. And then anything above 5%, but less than 10% might be allocated towards marketing and subscriber growth. And then anything greater than 10% might go to further, capital expansion. And if you're ever doing better than 15%, maybe you should be thinking about returning something to your subscribers or whatever, And again, these are just putting it out there as ways to think about the business, not necessarily saying this is the right answer.
Yeah, I think that there's I don't know if you call it wordsmithing or maybe politics or something word that I'd use to describe this. It's like it once too detailed and not detailed enough. Kind of.
Yeah.
What am I trying to say is it backseat driving a little bit.
So I could actually just, why don't you, here's how I would edit this to address this for sections A, B, C, and D here, where it says 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 and above 15. Just first define 4 ranges.
Yeah.
Starting with 0 and just define them as, low, medium, high, and very high. And then just plug those terms in there, and then the definition, then you can say the definition of what those ranges might be can be left to whoever's who's doing the model, who's maybe that's another recommendation, which is there's the model that will update, and I'm in the process of updating, and I know that there is one that exists within the light plan. I don't have a copy of it. Should be periodically updated and reviewed once a year. That's a recommendation I would make, actually.
Yeah, and so that was why this first section, which doesn't stand out as much, but establish an order of priority based on the level of return. So or priority of allocation priority based on, I think is what I was trying to do. And I really just wanted to introduce the concept to get you guys thinking about it. Not because I think this is particularly right or that I thought about it long enough to have a good reason for picking this. To me, it just seemed like, A, you have to run the business. B, you'd kind of like it to grow. C, you want to spend money to expand it further. And then after that, you probably ought to be thinking about, are you doing the right thing by your customers? At least if you're a municipality. I mean, anybody else would say shareholder return should be in there, but not. Business model analysis to make sure adequate reserves for depreciation, maintenance, catastrophic events, some model for that. Budgeting. There's a status quo. We haven't really defined what it is, but it's worth thinking about it. And there's the expand to fill existing opportunities in the unserved areas, which I think we all are very supportive of. And then growth in the business, grow the business towards some objective beyond what's been done today. That's all TBD, of course, but these are just options for what that recommendation could look like. And then asking the question, what external sources, the capital planning process, and follow up on work. So that brought us to the end. I really just wanted to sort of introduce it. And my ask here is think about what's missing, make some suggestions along those lines, including, something in this general format, and then think about which ones of these particular areas you might feel like writing the rationale for and the background material as we try to, move this into something that someone else who hasn't spent the kind of time we have on it could work with, and we'll just keep building.
Well, thanks, Mark, for putting that together. It's very helpful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
So just in terms of our sort of second to last agenda item would be wrap up next session. any suggestions for next week's agenda or next steps?
Excuse me.
What I really liked today's session. I feel like as if it's time to focus on the report, and I feel like as if this moved us a lot closer towards that.
Mhm.
So that'd be my request, to just keep doing this kind of thing.
Okay. And I am hoping that David will be able to come back and join us. He did mention to me that he hoped to return soon. So I don't mind building out some of these other ideas a little bit more, and I would, take any input. Anybody that gets me anything by Tuesday can assume that it will be on the screen on Thursday evening. On the other hand, if there's something that you feel like you want to write about, go ahead and write about it, and we can, anyone can be on point. I appreciated when Gail brought her, her sort of initial rationale draft, and maybe we could always go to a revision of that, or hopefully these things are beginning to inform each other. I know that Scott, you and Gordon had both volunteered to work on some of the previous sections, which we had called, just backing up to the beginning.
Yeah, I'm still assuming that assignment holds. So
yes, it does. And so this service growth one was the one where we were going to dive into all those topics about why people aren't taking the service and that kind of thing, which is why I stayed away from that recommendations until we've had a chance.
and Gordon's doing that one, and I'm doing two, right?
And you were thinking about and so now I've kind of fleshed out what the operational metrics kind of are, and that might. So I wanted to do that, and I had done a little bit of writing in sort of this. I think that there's a preliminary analysis with some maps and some things like that that sort of identifies what this GIS information is. So again, the first use of master address table is all the way up on page 1.
There's actually something I'd like to see in this analysis of areas and premises, and maybe this is actually kind of almost an executive summary. So it would be right at the top of that, which is to say, here are 3 or 4 different types of unserved groupings. Say a street that's got underground but doesn't have the conduit. You have it right there. Perfect. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And then and maybe a little pie chart that says, so someone at a quick glance could say, okay, I understand generally the problem. Where does it lie? And I couldn't actually answer how amongst those different categories that we've identified, I haven't tried to parse it to know which represents. Are they equally divided amongst those 3 or 4?
No, I haven't actually done that analysis, but when we
I think that would be useful at the end, whether it's however it comes about.
Okay. So that was kind of the point. You guys have this as I went into this meeting. I'll save this and send it out again. So anybody can feel free to work on any particular section that they want to work on. And if you do it with track changes and send it back, I don't mind trying to integrate it. I did it in rich text format because I thought that was something that everybody was able to work with. I'm working inside of Word, but it is an RTF document.
That's great. Thank you. Because like I said, I did have a problem one other time.
Yeah.
My personal version of Word is old.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I will make a commitment to work on this weekend.
Great. Okay. And we'll have, as I said, I will publish a generic kind of very similar to what we've just worked off of agenda for next week, so that's out of the way as soon as I have the Zoom credentials, which may change by next week because this was the last scheduled, and we'll go with that. So with that said, I will stop the screen share. I probably should have done a while ago. And if nobody else has anything further, I will ask for comments from anyone who's still here, if they want.
Public comments.
public comments. Pamela, would you like to say something?
Yes, please, Pamela Dritt, 13 Concord Green, Unit 4.
Mhm.
I urge you to actually put in at least a nod to this being a universal public good. I think it's clear that the whole town believes that. Those that understand what it is, at any rate, do believe that. And a lot of people focus on the financial side of something in order to deny it happening. We need to at least have the positive benefits in view. So I don't think we need to worry about it not being in the scope. It is in the scope through Article 15, the sustainability, Article 51, was it? Anyway, sustainability, our desire for non-carbon buildings, all of those things are connected to good internet connectivity.
Yeah.
Thanks for the good job you guys are doing. And also Concord Green, for example, is full of people who do not understand the benefit and think that Comcast provides a better product at a lower cost. And this is lack of understanding framed by using scary initial cost numbers to dampen people's desire.
I have a comment to the Comcast on better product at a better cost. Because this is a much more complicated than a single thing, meaning broadband access, it's very challenging to compare them. So bear in mind that Comcast includes cell service, broadband, television, alarm services, who knows what else they might offer, but certainly at least across those four things, you know, so it may, depending on what you desire to receive in terms of all those services, one could make an argument that it is lower cost. And also, of course, I would remind you the Internet Essentials, we can't get close to that, at least at this moment. So I'm not advocating Comcast at a better product, better cost, but it's apples and pomegranates. You know, it's different things. That's the challenge. Thank you.
Comcast doesn't provide emergency communication services, does it?
Well,
In a national disaster caused by climate change.
Well, I mean,
for a price they will and do.
Hey, Mark,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Pamela. Please continue.
No, I think she made her comment and
Okay.
gave a short answer. What did you want to say, Gordon?
I'm sorry that I didn't think of this at the time, but when we were talking about metrics, I think there's some operational metrics that because the metrics we were looking at were about this project, really, about completion. But I think that there's also some quality metrics that in terms of how effectively the organization is actually operating. And I'll give you just an example, which is, I mean, I'm thinking basically of outages and, you know, service quality. And maybe we don't want to highlight that to the extent that it undermines the case we're trying to make for the value of the service. But I really think that we can do better. And I think that we've actually fallen down a number of times in the last year. So what would that be? A level of service, kind of, what is it, SLA?
Service level agreement.
Yeah, or
SLA.
10 nines or availability or something like that.
10 nines, 5 nines, thank you. And by the way, 5 nines is 5 minutes out of the year that it's down.
Oh
And it
my
could be-
goodness.
yeah, I used to build 5.9 equipment. It's
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think for a start, if we could make sure that the broadband is as available as the electric service is. I actually don't know which one is worse right now. I'm betting that the broadband is because they had such a long outage twice within recent memory, but that should be unusual. And exactly how you balance it across, limited outage, like the thing that happened on Main Street in West Concord recently, or a townwide outage, like what happened with the, what was it, the
Router
DNS server or
configuration.
whatever?
Yeah, DNS server configuration. Yeah.
And of course, in formal risk assessment language, the impact is the probability of occurrence times the impact of
Yeah,
the severity of the occurrence. And so there's little doubt that losing your internet connection is not as impactful as losing your electrical connection in any given.
oh, well, okay, from that point of view, yeah, but I mean, in terms
But
of
that
time,
doesn't mean that.
Yeah.
right, because they're kind of the same wires. They,
Yeah.
they get knocked
Yeah,
down.
But what Mark is alluding to is a FMEA, failure modes effect analysis. And one part of an FMEA is probability, and then the other multiplier is the effect. So
Okay, so what you're saying is that the telecom, since it's not as important, doesn't need to provide the same level of,
no,
Well,
I'm just
saying
saying if you use that methodology, that could come out of it.
The impact of any given outage is probably less, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't manage the service to a very high rate. And you're raising a really good point, is that when I was thinking about metrics, I was thinking about things that are unique towards this challenge of how to build the fiber network, how to know whether you're building the fiber network, and the only reason I got into any of those operational metrics like subscribers and things like that was because I'm thinking in terms of how does that contribute to the ability to have an expectation of funding the construction of a fiber network. So you're right, we didn't, and I think you could make an argument both ways about whether or not day-to-day operations metrics are important to understand. But I do think that a perception of an unreliable service definitely impacts the likelihood that a customer will sign up for the service in the first place. So
yeah,
reputationally, your track record for service availability is very important.
yeah,
And I do think, and I think it's reasonable to conclude that we built this network was built on word of mouth in the first place, and I do think it took a bit of a black eye last year. I think we need to be honest about that. We may have some recovering to do. It could be a reason why the installation rate isn't where it was.
maybe. One other thing too is you mentioned, I was searching in the document for backlog. I found it. So we've captured it. Just not sure. But it wasn't in the section we reviewed today. So because it was something that's already being done, and granted, we don't need to tell them to do something they're already doing. But if we're presenting a set of metrics, even one that's already been produced could be worth mentioning, because in the context of things to think about.
Yeah, and actually that raises a good point, because a building backlog indicates that you don't have enough resources or have some other constraint.
Exactly. And honestly, coming into this project, I expected that building backlog would be really a key metric.
Yeah, and so cycle time and installation times are the ability to service those. So those are all good ones to add. So thank you. I made some notes, and I'll try to fit them in where appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
Great. I think with that, we could take a motion to adjourn. I appreciate everybody hanging in about almost a half an hour extra. So
I'll move to adjourn.
thanks, Scott.
I'll
I'll
second.
second. Okay.
Okay, Gail.
Reporter Gail got the second.
Yeah.
All you're waiting on is a roll call from me. So how about Gordon?
Aye.
Scott?
Aye.
Gail?
Aye.
And myself, aye. Thank you. Have a great week, everybody. Thank you for being here, Pamela. Thank you for being here, Jason.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, Mark.